The restaurant was too quiet for what I was about to do. I could hear the clinking of glasses, the low hum of conversations, and the pounding of my own heart. She didn't see me when I walked in. Of course she didn't. She was too busy leaning in close to him, her fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass like it was some kind of performance. I didn't plan on saying anything. I didn't plan on screaming or crying or demanding answers. I just walked up to their table, pulled the ring off my finger, and set it right between them. No words. No theatrics. Just the sound of metal against wood. She froze. Her hand, the one that had been resting so casually near his, snapped back like I'd burned her. He looked at me like I was an interruption, not a husband. I hated that look more than anything. My throat felt like it was closing, but I forced myself to speak. "Enjoy your evening," I said quietly, though I swear it came out louder in my head, like a scream. "You've already taken everything else from me." Then I turned around and walked away. I didn't look back, but I didn't have to. I could feel their eyes drilling into my back. The ring stayed there, shining under the soft restaurant light, a silent witness to the wreckage of everything I thought I knew. When I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me like a wave, and I stood there, trembling, trying to figure out if I was the biggest fool alive or just the most heartbroken man in the world. I never thought I'd see her like that, smiling in a way she hadn't smiled at me in months. But I wasn't prepared for what would happen next. Because that ring I left on the table, it started something darker, something far stranger than I ever imagined. When I left the restaurant, I didn't go home right away. I couldn't. I drove aimlessly through the city, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, replaying that moment over and over in my head. The sound of the ring hitting the table, the way Helen's face drained of color like someone had just pulled the plug on her entire soul. I thought I'd feel some sense of victory, like I'd finally stood up for myself. But instead, there was only this hollow ache. I felt like I'd cut off my own hand and left it there with her. By the time I finally pulled into our driveway, it was past midnight. The house looked different, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something bad to happen. I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the front door, trying to decide if I should go inside or just drive somewhere, anywhere else. When I did go in, the silence hit me harder than her betrayal. Every picture on the wall felt like it was mocking me. Her smile and the wedding photo by the stairs felt like a lie I'd been living with my whole life. I poured myself a drink. Then another. The clock ticked past 1 in the morning, and I was almost certain she wouldn't come home at all. That's when I heard it, a knock at the door. Not the sound of a key in the lock. A knock. Slow, deliberate, almost hesitant. My stomach flipped. I opened the door, and there she was, standing in the glow of the porch light. She wasn't wearing the dress from dinner anymore. She'd changed into one of my old hoodies, the one she always stole because it smelled like me. Her hair was messy, her face pale, and her eyes, God, her eyes looked wild, like she'd been crying for hours or seen something she couldn't unsee. "Larry," she whispered, and my name sounded like something fragile on her lips. "Please, can we talk?" I wanted to slam the door. I wanted to scream at her, tell her I'd seen enough, heard enough, felt enough. But I didn't, because when I looked at her, there was something different, something that wasn't guilt. It was fear, genuine, gut-twisting fear. She stepped inside without waiting for me to answer, her hands trembling as she tried to speak. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice cracking. "I need to tell you something, but you have to promise me. You have to promise you'll listen to all of it before you decide anything." I laughed bitterly. "Not what I think. Helen, I saw you with him. What exactly am I supposed to think?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head fiercely. "That man, it's not what it looked like. Larry, you don't know who he is. You don't know what's happening. If you did, you'd understand why I had to meet him." For a moment, I just stared at her, too stunned to respond. What the hell was she talking about? Who was this guy? And why did she look like she was about to collapse under the weight of her own secrets? Helen stood in the middle of our living room like a stranger who had just stepped into the wrong house. She wasn't crying the way I expected her to. It wasn't the kind of guilt-driven, apologetic tears you'd see in movies. It was different, like she was terrified of something much bigger than me finding out about her betrayal. I stayed silent, arms crossed, waiting for her to explain herself. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she began, her voice shaking. "But if I told you everything from the start, you'd never believe me. That man, you saw me with him because I had no choice. You have to believe me, Larry, it's not an affair. I almost laughed in her face. Not an affair? I had seen her hand resting on his, the way she leaned in like they shared some intimate secret. But the look on her face wasn't the look of a liar trying to talk her way out of trouble. She was pale, her lips trembling, as if every word was costing her something. Who is he? I demanded. If you're going to stand here in our living room and tell me I'm wrong, then you better give me something real. Who is this guy you're sneaking around with? Why does he get your smiles when I get nothing but excuses? Helen's eyes darted to the window, like she was checking for someone. Then she turned back to me and said the last thing I expected. His name is Daniel, and he's not who you think he is. He's connected to my family. My father owed him something serious. If I didn't meet with him, he threatened to destroy everything. Not just us, but my mom, my brother, all of us. I blinked. For a moment, I didn't even know how to respond. So let me get this straight, I said slowly. You're telling me this guy isn't your lover? He's some kind of what? A mobster? A debt collector? You expect me to believe that? I don't care what you believe, she shot back, her voice suddenly sharp. I was trying to keep you out of this, Larry. You wouldn't understand. You never. She stopped herself mid-sentence, but it was too late. Never what? I snapped. Never what, Helen? Never been good enough? Never noticed how distant you've been? You think I can't handle the truth, but instead of trusting me, you sit there with him like none of our years together matter? She dropped onto the couch, her hands covering her face. You don't get it, she whispered. If I told you everything, you'd be in danger too. But now it's too late. He saw you tonight. He knows who you are. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean, he knows who I am? I don't even know who he is. Helen looked up at me, her eyes hollow. Daniel isn't going to just let this go. You showing up tonight, giving me that ring. It's like you just declared war on him. And you have no idea what kind of man you've just provoked. Her words landed like a punch to my gut. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something worse than heartbreak. I felt fear. Real, cold fear. I didn't sleep that night. Helen passed out on the couch after crying herself into silence. But I just sat in the armchair across from her, staring at the empty space between us like it was a canyon I couldn't cross anymore. My mind wouldn't stop racing. I kept replaying her words, trying to make sense of them. Daniel isn't going to let this go. He saw you tonight. You've provoked him. It sounded ridiculous, like something out of a bad crime drama. And yet, there was something about the way her voice broke when she said his name. It wasn't fear of getting caught cheating. It was something deeper, something that made my stomach twist. By the time the sun came up, I knew I had to get answers. I left Helen sleeping and drove back to the restaurant from the night before. The staff barely remembered me, but I asked questions anyway. The guy with the dark suit and slicked hair, I said. The one who was here with the woman last night. Do you know him? The waitress gave me this strange look, like I'd asked her something she wished she hadn't heard, and just shook her head. But it wasn't a normal no. It was the kind of no that really means, I'm not getting involved in this. When I came home, Helen was sitting at the kitchen table, pale and quiet, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. She didn't even look up when I walked in. Where were you? She asked softly. Finding out who this guy is, I said. And don't tell me you can't talk about it. Not anymore. I need the truth, Helen. All of it. Right now. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Larry, Daniel isn't just someone you can find out about. He's dangerous. He's done things you can't even imagine. My father got mixed up with him years ago, back when he lost his business. He borrowed money. A lot of money. When he couldn't pay it back, Daniel didn't just take the house or the car. He made my father do things. Things I can't even say out loud. My family's been under his thumb ever since. Then why the hell didn't you tell me any of this? I demanded, my voice shaking. Why keep me in the dark? Because you do something stupid, she said, finally looking at me with a mix of anger and despair. And now you have. You went there, you confronted me, and he saw you. Do you know what that means? He knows who you are. He knows we are connected. And Daniel doesn't like loose ends. Before I could even respond, her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it and went white. Without thinking, I grabbed it and looked at the screen. It was a text message from an unknown number. You made a scene last night. We need to talk. Tonight. Or things will get worse for both of you. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. This is him, isn't it? I said, my voice low. Helen nodded slowly. I didn't know what I was more afraid of. This man I'd never met. or the fact that Helen wasn't even surprised by the threat. She knew this was coming. She'd been living in this nightmare for years, and somehow, I'd just stumbled into the middle of it. "What does he want?" I asked, but Helen just stared at me, silent, her hands trembling on the table. I realized then that I might not want the answer. That text message sat between us like a loaded gun, its presence sucking all the air out of the room. Helen didn't even try to take the phone back from me. She just sat there, her hands clasped so tightly together that her knuckles were white. I stared at the words again and again. "We need to talk. Tonight. Or things will get worse for both of you." There was no bluff in that tone, no hesitation. It wasn't a threat so much as a statement of fact, and that chilled me far more than any angry outburst could have. "What does he mean by worse?" I asked, though part of me didn't really want the answer. Helen just shook her head like a child who'd been scolded too many times. "You don't understand who you're dealing with," she said finally, her voice trembling. "Daniel doesn't make idle threats. If he says, worse, he means something that will tear us apart. Our lives, our families, everything. You can't ignore him, Larry. You don't know what he's capable of." I laughed bitterly, even though my hands were shaking. "I don't know what he's capable of? Helen, you don't know what I'm capable of right now. I saw you with him. Do you even realize how insane this sounds to me? Some mystery man threatens our family, and you're just meeting him for dinner? Smiling at him like he's some kind of old friend? You think I wanted to be there?" She shot back, and for the first time, I saw anger crack through her fear. "You think I wanted to sit there and pretend? Every time I'm with him, I feel like I'm choking. But I have to, because if I don't, you'll end up paying for debts that aren't even yours. My father's debts. My family's mistakes. Do you get that?" I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. But there was still this gnawing feeling in my chest, this whisper in the back of my mind telling me that there was more she wasn't saying. Something about the way she described him didn't sit right with me. We sat in silence for a long time, both of us too afraid to move. Finally, I stood up and grabbed my keys. "If he wants to talk tonight," I said, my voice hard, "then I'll give him what he wants. I'll talk to him myself." Helen's face went pale. "No, Larry, you don't know what you're saying. You can't just walk into his world. You'll get hurt. He doesn't think like normal people. He doesn't forgive. If he feels even slightly disrespected." I cut her off. "Good. Maybe he needs someone to stand up to him. Maybe you've been living under his shadow for so long that you've forgotten what that feels like. But I'm not afraid of him, Helen. Not anymore." She tried to stop me, grabbing my arm, but I pulled away. The truth is, I wasn't brave. I wasn't some action hero about to take on a villain. I was terrified. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the steering wheel when I left the house. But I couldn't sit there any longer, waiting for this man to decide the fate of my life like I was just another pawn in his game. I parked 2 blocks from the restaurant where I'd seen him the night before. It was early evening, the sky bruised with storm clouds, and my heart was pounding as I waited in my car. I didn't know what I was looking for, his face, his car, some kind of sign that he was nearby. And then, like something out of a nightmare, I saw him. Daniel was walking out of a corner store, his hair slicked back just like the night before, his posture relaxed, almost arrogant. He didn't look dangerous. He looked normal. But maybe that was the point. I waited until he crossed the street, and then I got out of my car, my voice cracking as I shouted, "Hey, you and me, we need to talk." He turned slowly, and the moment our eyes met, I knew I'd made a mistake. There was something in his gaze, something sharp and calculating, like he was already 5 moves ahead of me. And then he smiled, not a friendly smile, but one that told me I'd just stepped into something I wasn't ready for. Daniel didn't move at first. He just stood there on the opposite side of the street, studying me like I was some insect he hadn't decided whether to crush or ignore. I felt the weight of his gaze, and for a second, my courage faltered. The rain had started to fall lightly, beating on his dark coat, and there was this eerie calmness in the way he slipped his hands into his pockets, like he was entirely in control of the moment while I was just unraveling. "You must be Larry," he said finally, his voice smooth but carrying a quiet authority that made my stomach twist. I was wondering when we'd meet. He crossed the street with unhurried steps, never taking his eyes off me, and by the time he was standing a few feet away, I felt like I'd already lost some kind of battle I didn't even know I was fighting. "I don't know who you think you are," I started, my voice louder than I intended. "But whatever this is with Helen, it ends now. You don't get to sit across from my wife and threaten her. You don't get to. He raised a hand casually, and I stopped talking. Not because I wanted to, but because something about the gesture felt like a command. You're a brave man, Larry, he said with a smirk that made my blood boil. Brave, but not very smart. You walked into something you don't understand. You think this is about your wife? It's not. It's about choices made long before you showed up in her life. I wanted to punch him right there, wipe that smug look off his face, but there was something in his tone, something cold and final, that rooted me to the ground. You're not going to scare me, I said, though even I didn't believe the words. If you think you can just push us around. Push you around? Daniel tilted his head slightly, as if amused. No, Larry, I don't need to push. People like your wife's father, they fall on their own. They come to me because they have nowhere else to go. And when they can't pay back what they owe, they give me other things. Favors, information, sometimes loyalty, sometimes silence. The way he said silence made my skin crawl. It was as if he was offering me a preview of my own future, and I didn't like the picture. I don't care about any of that, I snapped. Helen's not your problem anymore. You stay away from her, or I swear. He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the rain dripping from his lashes, close enough that I could smell the faint scent of some expensive cologne. Or you swear what? You think because you stormed into a restaurant and slammed a ring on the table that you're suddenly a man to be feared? His voice was quiet, but it cut deeper than if he'd shouted. Let me make this simple. You'll back off. You'll keep your mouth shut. Because if you don't, well, let's just say you'll learn how quickly a life can unravel when the wrong people decide they don't like you. For a moment, I was frozen, because he wasn't threatening me in some vague, cinematic way. His tone was casual, like he was talking about the weather, and that made it so much worse. I'm not scared of you, I said finally, though my voice cracked slightly, betraying me. Daniel smiled, but it wasn't a real smile. It was the kind of smile that hides knives. Good, he said, turning to walk away. Fear is overrated. I prefer obedience. You'll figure that out soon enough. I stood there in the rain, watching him disappear down the street, my chest heaving like I'd just run a marathon. It wasn't until I got back to my car that I realized my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the keys. I drove home in silence, trying to convince myself I'd done the right thing by confronting him. But deep down, I knew I'd only made things worse. When I walked through the door, Helen was waiting, her face pale, her hands clutching that same old hoodie. She looked at me like she already knew what I'd done, like she could feel the storm I'd just walked into. Larry, she whispered, what did you say to him? I didn't answer right away. I just stood there dripping rainwater on the carpet, realizing that the man I'd just spoken to wasn't going to vanish from our lives. He was going to dig himself in deeper, and I had no idea how to stop him, or if it was even possible anymore. Helen didn't even need me to answer her question. She could read it in my face. The minute I stepped inside, dripping rain and trembling from the weight of what had just happened, she knew I'd made the worst possible move. She didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't even ask me for details. Instead, she just sank onto the edge of the couch and buried her face in her hands like a woman who had just seen the future and hated every second of it. What have you done, Larry? She murmured, her voice muffled but raw. You don't get it. Confronting him isn't brave. It's suicide. Daniel isn't like other men. He's patient, and when he feels challenged, he doesn't fight you directly. He dismantles your life piece by piece until there's nothing left. I wanted to argue, to tell her I wasn't going to let some creep threaten my family, but the words felt empty even as they formed in my mouth. I'd seen the way Daniel looked at me, like I was a bug he could squash at any moment but preferred to toy with first. And I hated that it worked, hated how just thinking about him made my chest feel tight. The night dragged on like a slow bleed. Helen and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was tense, clipped, like every word could ignite another argument. Around 2 a.m., her phone buzzed again. She went pale when she saw the screen. I snatched it from her before she could hide it and read the message. You should have stayed in your lane, Larry. Let's see how good you are at protecting what's yours. There was an address attached. No explanation, no threat spelled out. Just an address across town. My hands went numb as I stared at it. What the hell does this mean? I demanded, my voice trembling. Helen's lips were quivering as she said, it means he wants you to go there. He wants to show you what happens when you don't listen. Larry, please, don't go. He's setting you up. That's how he works. He lures you in, makes you think you have a choice, but really, the choice is already gone. But I couldn't sit still. I couldn't just wait for him to take another step closer to us. I grabbed my jacket and keys, ignoring Helen's pleading voice, and drove to the address. Every mile I covered felt heavier than the last. The street was dark, a forgotten stretch of industrial buildings and warehouses that reeked of rust and oil. When I pulled up, there was a single light flickering outside one of the buildings. No cars, no sound, just the wind howling through broken windows and the hum of that lone bulb. I stepped out of the car, my heart pounding, and as I moved closer, I saw something lying on the ground near the entrance. It was a photo. My photo. It was a picture of me and Helen at our wedding, smiling like two idiots who thought love could shield them from the world. Someone had smeared something dark, maybe oil, maybe something worse, across my face. Underneath it, a note was scrawled in jagged handwriting. "This is what I take first." I felt my stomach turn as I looked around, half expecting Daniel to step out of the shadows. But no one came. There was only silence, the kind that feels heavy, almost alive. I grabbed the photo, stuffed it into my jacket, and backed away, every instinct screaming at me to get the hell out of there. By the time I got home, my hands were still shaking. Helen saw the look on my face and didn't ask what happened. She just knew. And that's when I realized something terrifying. Daniel wasn't just sending a message. He was telling me that I'd already lost control, that this was his game now, and I was just a pawn waiting for him to make his next move. I didn't sleep after that night. Every creak of the house felt like a warning, every passing car outside like it could be him, waiting. Helen sat on the floor with her back against the wall, knees drawn up to her chest, silent tears streaming down her face. For hours, neither of us spoke, too afraid of the words we might say out loud. But somewhere around dawn, something inside me snapped, not with fear, but with clarity. I was done letting this man control my life. Done letting him hold my wife's past like a weapon over us. Helen and I had been letting this rot fester between us for too long, and if we didn't fight back now, there wouldn't be anything left to save. I took her hands in mine, and for the first time in weeks, I looked her straight in the eye and said, "We end this today. Together." She hesitated, her gaze searching mine as if she couldn't believe I meant it. "Larry, you don't know him. You can't just—" "I'm not alone anymore," I interrupted. "Not if we're in this together. Whatever Daniel has on your family, whatever fear he's been using to control you, it ends now." That morning, I called a friend of mine from college, Marcus, who'd become a lawyer with connections I didn't even know he had. I told him everything, every terrifying detail. At first, I thought he'd laugh it off or tell me I was overreacting, but he didn't. He listened carefully, and then he said, "Larry, this guy is a parasite. You don't fight him by meeting him on his turf. You cut off the power he thinks he has." With Marcus's help, we dug into Daniel's past, and it turned out he wasn't as untouchable as he wanted us to believe. He'd built his intimidation on a pile of illegal dealings that were easier to trace than I expected. By that afternoon, we had enough evidence to hand over to the authorities: financial fraud, extortion, and a dozen other crimes that made my head spin. Marcus called a contact he had in law enforcement, someone who'd been waiting years to nail a guy like Daniel. The hardest part was convincing Helen to trust that this would work. She'd lived under his shadow for so long that fear had become her default state. But when we handed over everything we had, when I saw that spark of hope in her eyes, I knew we'd made the right choice. 2 days later, it happened. Daniel was arrested in broad daylight. The news reported it as part of a larger investigation, but I knew, deep down, that our actions had tipped the scales. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. Helen and I spent the evening sitting on the back porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees. For the first time in months, we talked. Not about fear, not about debts or betrayals, but about us. About how close we'd come to losing everything, and how much we still wanted to fight for what we had. She took my hand, her fingers trembling slightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for not trusting you, for thinking I had to face it alone." I squeezed her hand. "No more secrets, Helen. We face everything together. Always." As the sky turned to a wash of orange and pink, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from pretending everything's fine, but the kind that comes when you've been through the fire and come out stronger on the other side. That night, As we sat there together, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't just grateful that Daniel was gone. I was grateful for the chaos he'd brought, because in the end, it forced us to remember why we chose each other in the first place. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I knew we were going to be okay.